So the last thing I'm going to talk about in this module, I kind of mentioned that this is going to be a shorter set of videos for this module, are some alternative fuels for transportation. So as I mentioned, right now in the United States, approximately 85 to 90%, depending on the year, of all of our transportation is fueled at least to some degree by petroleum, by oil. However, we only have a finite amount of oil, and at some point, those taps are going to run dry. So not only do we have a really big carbon footprint issue, but we also have a really big issue having to keep in mind the fact that eventually our oil is going to run out. And this is something that our government is actually pretty well aware of. Here in the United States, the US Department of Energy has set a 30 by 30 goal. And the idea is that we would like to have our transportation fueled at least 30% by alternative fuels by 2030. So the goal is 30% from alternative fuels by 2030. Now, seeing as we are in 2020 and we're barely at 10%, maybe a little bit more depending on the year, this is a pretty ambitious goal if you ask me. But newer technologies are being created, and these newer technologies are actually making alternative fuel vehicles much more attractive, much more accessible, much better. Some of these alternative energy sources include natural gas. Unfortunately, that kind of has that issue of fracking. Hydrogen power, believe it or not, hydrogen powered vehicles are becoming a thing now. The Toyota Mirai is a good example of that. Electric vehicles, I can't let my friend Elon Musk down. I'm not friends with him. I kind of wish I was. I'd borrow some money from him. Hybrid vehicles like the one I drive. Biofuels are another potential alternative to petroleum powered vehicles. And actually, biofuels actually have some pretty interesting implications to them. So let's briefly talk about some of these. So many government vehicles, as well as many buses, actually run on natural gas. And they'll have a little diamond on their chassis somewhere that says CNG. I think the C stands for clean. The NG stands for natural gas. One of the benefits of natural gas is that, one, it is a much cleaner burning gas than typical petroleum. Typical petroleum, in addition to carbon dioxide, shoots out a lot of other crap that we don't want, polluting our air, whereas natural gas is actually much cleaner burning, meaning that really the biggest byproduct you get is carbon dioxide. The other benefit, as I've actually said before, is burning the natural gas and converting it to carbon dioxide is actually a better alternative to just letting it float away and getting into our atmosphere, because natural gas, which is mostly made up of methane, has a much higher greenhouse potential, anywhere between 20 to 30%. And actually, depending on the time scale, even larger than that, to carbon dioxide. So natural gas has been seen as an alternative. The problem, however, is that we are so reliant on natural gas for electricity generation that we've had to come up with very creative ways to get it, including fracking. And fracking has shown its share of problems. What about electric vehicles? So electric vehicles are becoming much more popular thanks to Elon Musk and Tesla. These are very beneficial in that they only require recharging rather than refueling. So once you purchase the vehicle, the only thing that you need is to be recharging it. Now, with that said, I know that some people make the argument that, so now we are moving the carbon footprint from the combustion of gasoline to the generation of electricity from coal and natural gas. Well, if you're here in California, though, we are at a point where almost half of every kilowatt hour of electricity that we generate is actually from renewable resources. So here in California, this is actually a viable alternative. Some of the challenges that still exist, though, um, a big one is limited distance. So if you're driving around town, an electric vehicle may actually be a good alternative to you. However, if you have family in, say, Southern California, or if you ever need to drive more than a few hundred miles, you're going to have a problem because you're going to have to pull over and recharge. And we're still at this place where recharging vehicles is not very time efficient. Um, that's being worked on, but it's still an issue. And that mentions the high recharge times. So you have to pull over and recharge. And unlike just pumping gas into your car, which takes 5 minutes, it may take an hour, it may take 45 minutes, it may take an hour, it may take 2 hours. That's now time added to your trip. Another big issue is the carbon footprint of batteries. There is a lot of emissions that go into simply mining and processing and constructing the batteries. And so this is actually another big issue. Even though maybe they use less direct energy, they use more indirect energy in the actual production of the battery. On the other hand, there are actually some benefits. So first off, they don't emit greenhouse gases directly. They don't release aerosols, so cleaner. They save consumer money on gasoline. Electricity is a lot cheaper than gasoline. When you think about how much money it takes to power your home versus how much money it would take to fuel your car, yeah, driving an electric vehicle would actually save you money in that particular area. Now, that being said, until we can get to a place where electric cars can drive farther and drive faster and charge quicker, they're still kind of limited. They're still kind of limited. And until we get to a place where the carbon footprint of mining the materials and producing the batteries is offset more than enough by the reduced carbon footprint of driving the thing, the truth is that electric vehicles still have a little ways to go. There's actually a good video that I'll try to link in the description of this video from a favorite show of mine called Adam Ruins Everything, where Adam Conover, the host, actually talks a little bit about the problems with electric vehicles. Nevertheless, electric vehicles are becoming a bit more of a viable option. And pretty much every single major manufacturer actually does have some electric vehicles. Chevy had the Chevrolet Volt, Nissan had the Nissan Leaf, and of course we all know about Tesla. Tesla's sort of become the big motor company now. I mean, it's actually, I think, the most valuable car company in the entire world. Don't hold me to that, but I'm pretty sure that that's true, at least by stock value. And so even Teslas have become a pretty viable alternative. And then there are people like me who maybe quite aren't ready to go with an electric vehicle, but instead really do want to kind of stick a little bit with gas, but also would like to use some of the benefits of an electric vehicle. That is where hybrids come. And really, the bee's knees and how of hybrids is the Toyota Prius. The Toyota Prius has really been sort of the trendsetter for hybrid vehicles. And in fact, usually when people think about hybrid vehicles, they think about the Toyota Prius. So the way that a Toyota Prius and most hybrid vehicles work is that they actually connect a gasoline engine to an electric motor. That gasoline engine can both power the wheels that turn, as well as power the electric motor that can also turn those wheels. A big benefit of this is that unlike with a normal gasoline powered car, where some energy is wasted away, in this case, some of that energy is actually stored in a battery, which can then run the electric motor again. Gasoline charges the battery, and then when the vehicle stops or goes below a certain speed, the computer system inside the vehicle will actually turn off the gasoline engine and turn on the electric engine instead. There's also another process called regenerative braking, where basically what happens is as the car is stopping, as the car is slowing down and as the car is stopping, the braking mechanism also charges the battery. Hybrids are much more fuel efficient, in some cases as high as 30% more fuel efficient than a traditional gas-powered vehicle. As I mentioned, I drive a Toyota Prius. I have driven the living heck out of that car. It just passed 160,000 miles at the making of this video, and I still get about 40 miles per gallon on it. When it was brand new, it was closer to 50 miles per gallon. So that's, to me, pretty good bang for my buck, if you ask me. I've been very pleased with it. It's been having some issues with its ignition coils lately that I need to get fixed. Hopefully I can still get it on the road for another 80,000 miles, knock on wood. And then there's actually a hybrid that even goes another step further called a plug-in hybrid. One other type of vehicle that I want to talk about really quickly that I didn't actually include the slide on here for, hydrogen-powered vehicles. So in the process of oxidizing hydrogen, converting hydrogen to water vapor, there is actually a big release of energy that occurs there. Many vehicles, such as the Toyota Mirai, basically operate very similar to how a Prius operates, but instead of using electric charging or gasoline, instead it uses hydrogen. And what happens is hydrogen reacts with oxygen that gets sucked into the engine. That causes the combustion reaction to occur, and the only byproduct is water vapor. Now, hybrid vehicles were at one time seen as very, very inaccessible. They were very expensive. You would be spending $30,000, $35,000, $40,000, $45,000 to buy a hybrid vehicle. But as times have gone on, when gas prices went up, there was a big push to actually make hybrid vehicles much more fuel efficient and to also make them much more financially attractive. Well, as that happened, more people have bought them, and we've actually seen a pretty big increase in the share of hybrid electric vehicles now. And not only that, but hybrid electric vehicles tend to stay on the road a little bit longer than a lot of traditional gasoline vehicles. Okay, another fun, I guess not fun, but another fascinating alternative to all of this, biofuels. So believe it or not, many of the energy potentials that are stored in fossil fuels can also be stored in currently living things, such as you and me, such as flowers, such as trees, such as animals, such as all kinds of things. There's a lot of energy stored in us. Well, the idea behind biofuels is rather than tapping into energy that's been sitting underground for 5 million years, why don't we tap into energy that is currently present on the surface of the earth? Here's how it works. What we do is we grow certain plants, usually corn, maybe some types of grain, and we ferment that into ethanol. Yes, that's the same kind of alcohol as that. So you are literally getting your car drunk. And what happens is biomass in particular that is used is fermented to then become ethanol is actually um, is then can actually then be used to fuel vehicles. And believe it or not, there are many vehicles on the road right now that actually use some level of ethanol. Um, and in fact, many gasolines have at least 10% ethanol in them. Other vehicles, such as flex fuel vehicles, can even have as high as 85% from ethanol, as high as 85% ethanol. Um, and here's a big benefit of biofuels. The biggest benefit from biofuels is, believe it or not, they are almost carbon neutral. The reason why they are almost carbon neutral is because literally, even though the combustion still produces carbon dioxide, that was carbon dioxide that had just been taken out of the atmosphere by growing the biomass. So basically, all that you're doing is you're growing corn, converting it to ethanol, burning the ethanol. That carbon dioxide released by the burning of the ethanol was the same carbon dioxide that was absorbed by the growing of the corn. So guess what? That ethanol that's now being released into the atmosphere, or sorry, that carbon dioxide that's now being released by combusting ethanol, can then just go back to the next year's batch of corn and do the same thing. So basically, the idea here is that unlike using petroleum, which is an element of the long-term carbon cycle, growing, fermenting, and burning corn and burning ethanol actually is just a leg of the short-term carbon cycle. So instead of accelerating a long-term leg, all we're doing is we're accelerating a short-term leg. Yay, that actually makes us carbon neutral. That actually makes us a lot less. That greatly reduces our carbon footprint. Now, ethanol is not the only type of biofuel. There's also biodiesel, which is produced from vegetable oils and fats, very clean burning compared to regular diesel. And many diesel vehicles can actually run on biodiesel. They're already designed to run on biodiesel. Or you only have to make a small adjustment to the engine for them to run on biodiesel. So the benefit of this is that it's renewable, meaning that you just grow more crops. You convert them to ethanol or you convert them to biofuel. You run your vehicles on it. And the carbon dioxide that's being released is the same amount as was being absorbed in the growing of the food to begin with. The big challenge is food insecurity. The reality is that we have to ask ourselves the question, well, are we going to use this food for fuel or are we going to use it to feed people? Now, in countries like the United States, that might not be that big of a deal. But in many food scarce countries, that might be a huge deal. So there are some trade-offs with that. However, as we are actually transitioning to more alternative fuels, biofuels are most definitely a viable alternative. And they're already on the road. We already flex fuel vehicles, meaning they can already run on ethanol. They can already run on ethanol. They can already run on ethanol. You really don't have to change anything, or you may have to make a slight, it's like just flipping a switch to turn it from a gasoline powered engine to an ethanol powered engine. But other than that, it can actually be a much, much, much better alternative. In fact, there are some countries, such as Brazil, that are almost already completely ethanol based. They're almost completely ethanol based already. There's also algae biofuels that we're looking at. There's all kinds of alternatives. So really what I'm trying to say here is that between natural gas, between between natural gas, between electric vehicles, between hydrogen vehicles, between hybrid vehicles, and between biofuels, we really do kind of have a pick of the litter as far as what will replace gasoline in the future. Obviously, this is going to be a slow and rough transition, but it is a transition that is still worth doing. Just to get a little bit more futuristic, what about a nuclear powered car? So, nuclear fission actually produces a lot of energy. Nuclear fission produces a lot of energy. That energy can then be used to create steam, turning a turbine, and that creates a lot of power. Well, here's the problem though. So, nuclear powered cars actually exist. You could have a very, very high energy car. It can travel far without needing to refuel, meaning that you're not having to stop at the gas pump all the time. And nuclear reactors can actually be very, very long lived. Obviously, there's some pretty major challenges with this. First off, radiation exposure. And the weight that is caused by this. Nuclear reactors are very, very heavy. Being able to convert that into, being able to scale that down into something that you could put into a car, that's problematic. And then obviously radiation exposure again. We don't want every car crash to turn into the next Chernobyl. All right, the final alternative that I'm going to talk about is public transit. Public transportation is also a much more efficient way of getting around. Obviously, cycling, walking, and running have the lowest carbon footprint because you're not combusting anything. But public transportation actually has a much lower carbon footprint than many other forms of transportation. Why? Because even though that bus may require more fuel, it's also carrying more people. It's carrying more people. And so, and you can actually notice this, especially, so when you actually look at the, what's down here called the carbon emission intensity, what you'll actually notice is that things such as bicycling, walking, and running, and so on have very, very, very low carbon footprints. Mostly in things like or the food that fuels you to go, the carbon emissions from your shoes, and so on and so forth. Very, very minuscule, very, very, very minor carbon footprints. However, city transit, buses, and so on are much more fuel efficient. They have a much, much less carbon emission intensity compared to cars and trucks and so on. And one of the biggest negatives of this is that here in the United States, we are kind of behind the times in terms of our fuel efficiency for these different public transits. But really, overall, taking public transit is much more fuel efficient than taking a personal vehicle. More fuel efficient than taking a personal vehicle. And many types of public transit here in the United States actually also use alternative fuels. Here in the Bay Area, most of our buses actually either run on electricity or are hybrids. And in fact, that's actually a goal here in the state of California, that all public transit would either be electric, hybrid, or natural gas, such as this bus here in Los Angeles. There are many reasons to be fuel efficient. One, it saves us money. Two, it reduces our carbon footprint. Three, it allows us to actually stretch our oil reserves for longer because eventually they're going to run out. And the longer we stretch them for, the longer we can actually hold off on, or the smoother the transition will be to alternative fuels. So that's pretty much it for this module. as I mentioned, it's a little bit shorter than the previous modules. We have one more module to go after this, and that is the public perception of climate change, as well as a little smorgasbord of what's going on here in the Bay Area and in California in terms of climate change. So that'll be our final module. And that's it. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, as always, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. And I will see you all again very, very soon.